And the fine candidates that you see in front of you are the ones who graciously accepted our invitation. So thank you to State Representative Michelle Cook. We also have State Representative Maria Horn. And we have two candidates, Justin Potter and Paul Honig, here tonight with us. Thank you for coming. So I'd like to just go ahead and begin this with the first question, which was sent in by Alex, I believe, Kawa. Let me just put my glasses on. Need these reading tools here. Okay. So the first question is, several states have passed laws providing universal free school meals, while Connecticut has considered such a program and has not been passed. Would the candidates support passing this law? We'll go one by one. We can start right here.
Yes.
Easy.
I think something like universal free school meals is a great idea. Kids who are not fed well don't learn well, so I think it's really important that we well fed. Universal takes away the stigma from some kids who might not be able to afford meals, and they get it for free, and they kind of get looked down upon. So that's a great aspect of the program. And one of the benefits that we had during COVID was that the federal government actually sent us money to have this program, which was really helpful. I think this is it's a great idea, but it's a matter of I think it costs something like $65 million to fund that for a year for breakfast and lunch, and we just need to see if we can find that money to do that.
Thank you.
So I do agree with the program. I think it's extremely important that we have children that have full tummies so their brains can be full as well. And we do that in the early years when we're in preschool, and then we transition out of that. There is a budgetary component to that, and I know that we had tried to figure that out in the last couple of legislative years. And we do recognize as well that it did work during the pandemic. And so trying to figure out that balance of how we pay for it, but yet also recognizing the vital importance is really where I know we are committed to going forward with in the next legislative session. So yes, I do.
Okay, and thank you. On to you, Maria Horn.
It's going to be hard to go forth with this excellent group ahead of me. I also support the policy for all the reasons that have been stated. Hungry children don't learn as well. It avoids stigma if everybody has access to this, but I will also pick up on the budgetary aspects that others do. So I happen to chair the Finance Committee during the pandemic, and we've seen what it's done, and we can look at that and use that as a good example for how it pays off with our kids, which are about the most important investment we can make.
Great answers. Thank you so much, everyone. Now we'll move on to question 2, which was sent in by Kevin Hayes. Firefighters may get job-related cancer that may not present until after retirement. While treatment may be supported during employment, after retirement, treatment and compensation for bodily injury or function may not be supported. What is your stance on firefighters and cancer?
May I recommend that we start with Representative Michelle Cook, who was instrumental in creating this program in the first place.
Very well. We'll start with Michelle Cook.
No pressure. Thanks, Representative. I want to thank Kevin for the question. I would be remiss if I didn't start the answer with honoring a dear friend that we lost. Deputy Chief Chris Pepler, who is our own Torrington firefighter. And he fought fires his entire life. And he was one of the folks, along with another good friend of mine, Danny Houghton, who was also a firefighter, who also had cancer, but he served in Waterbury, that really brought this to my attention. Because at the end of the day, under the workers' comp legislation, cancer for firefighters wasn't covered. But cancer for police officers was. And what ended up happening was there was a time where there was a high rate of testicular cancer for police officers. And they didn't know why, but they knew that that rate was increasingly high, and they needed to cover it all the while they figured it out. So they did figure it out, and they realized that our police officers were laying their radar guns on their lap. And by eliminating the radar guns on their lap, help reduce that type of cancer. Firefighters, a little bit different in their work, they're engulfed in a fire. Head to toe, arm to arm, and the extreme amount of cancer rates that are in our firefighters, both men and women, has been on the rise for many, many years. And a lot of that has been proven to be because of the synthetics that have happened in our construction of materials that we have, as opposed to what would have been in our parents, our grandparents, and beyond years. Something that would have taken 20 or 25 minutes to go up in flames now takes 2 to 3 minutes to go up in flames. So all that synthetic seeps into their gear. So several years ago, I worked with that group of gentlemen alongside the state group of firefighters, pushing the Firefighter Cancer Fund. And what that did was actually, it puts money from the general fund into a special firefighter cancer fund, governed by those folks that know the job the best, and that is firefighters, doctors, and the like. And what they can do now, those firefighters had to have a portfolio, if you will. They have to have requirements. They have to have physicals. It was a 5-year look back. So we built this in for a 5-year look. So our firefighters have the opportunity to get the appropriate physicals and screenings. They can't chew tobacco. So there's a variety of things that they have to adhere to on their end. And then, God forbids, into the firefighter cancer group and say, unfortunately, I have cancer and I'm needing help. And so since then, we were able to we have millions of dollars in that fund, but we were also able to expand that because we realized that was kind of limited. Our firefighters don't get multiple days off. They don't have unlimited time off. The way that things work, they don't have the opportunity to utilize workers' comp. And if you do utilize workers' comp, for anybody that has ever dealt with workers' comp, you know that can take years upon years upon years, and a lot of times people don't make it through their cancer battle before that fight is done. So we were able to pass that. I'm very proud of that. That's one of the most important things I think that we've been able to do in my tenure in office. We've also been able to expand that for certain different types of coverages. And that also focuses, and we had people come back and push back on us. We don't want this to be a municipal mandate. Our municipalities don't want to pay for it. But we also recognize at the same time that our men and women run into those buildings when we are running out, and we need to do something. They don't have 2 sets of turnout gear. They're not able to clean that. The dryer for their gear is very expensive. So there's so many moving parts and components, and we are also looking to expand that a little bit more. But that is where we are for firefighters and cancer, and I'm very proud of that and all the folks that were able to support that.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to add to that?
I'll add just a little bit, which is that just from my experience, so I sit on the Environment Committee, throughout my tenure, and I used to chair the Public Safety Committee, and so those two overlap a lot. And in particular, just that, Michelle mentioned at the beginning of her presentation, just the amount of, chemicals that we are now learning about their effects of, that we look at every year in the Environment Committee, the number of them that these firefighters put on themselves or spray out of a nozzle is extraordinary. And so, as we look at those, the impact on the environment, we also have to make sure that we're taking care of those who are most intimately connected with the use of those chemicals.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, the gear that firefighters use to make it flame retardant has these chemicals in it that we know cause cancer. And I think in addition, there's also an effort to get these chemicals out of their suits going forward. And as the 2 state representatives said, these people are going into harm's way to take care of us, so we need to take care of them when they run into issues like cancer.
Okay.
I'd just like to thank Michelle for her work putting that together. Firefighters put themselves in a unique, immediate danger, and we know that after the fact, with all those burning materials, in addition to what is coating their gear, plastic, which would be benign, of course benign in most circumstances, and when it's burned, it becomes highly toxic. And it could be decades for firefighters to suffer the consequences of that exposure. So I do think we have an obligation to take care of them in their later years, long after they've left active
Thank you very much for your responses. Moving on to question number 3, which was sent in by Jessica Legan. What changes do you feel would be necessary to lessen the burden of childcare costs?
Go ahead.
Should we also start with Michelle on that one?
I'll tag team you. Go ahead.
Okay. So I chair the Early Childhood Caucus at the State House. And I've been working nationally on this topic. And so interesting that they kind of went back to back. And whoever those, the folks are, I want to thank them for the questions. The burden on childcare if you look around the room, that affects each and every one of us. And if we do not have enough childcare, quality childcare, we do not have enough people to go to work. And we know that we have tens of thousands of jobs that go empty and unfilled each and every day. And a lot of those are because people do not feel comfortable or do not have a place that they can afford to send their children for early childhood education so they can go to work. And so collectively, this conversation is multifaceted. Our early childcare providers are instrumental in crafting the youngest minds, and they set the foundation for education before they ever get to kindergarten through 12th grade. And we talk about achievement gaps, and that achievement gap starts well before kindergarten if we do not equal out the way that childcare is developed and balanced. But at the same time, we have to pay for that. And we also have to ensure that the people that are getting paid are paid a beyond livable wage, because compared to what our educators get from K through 12th grade, these folks are not. They're getting pennies on the dollar. So this year we put into place, and I'll have Maria piggyback on this a little bit, what was initially an early childhood trust fund. So we can have public-private partnerships, and so private businesses can donate into this fund, and then we as a State House, and I've actually been deemed the chair of this committee by the good speaker, that we can help figure out a way to disseminate that money in areas of need. And that committee has not started yet. It was just codified and legislated and ended in May. So we're working forward on the people that are going to sit on that committee so we can figure out what that looks like. But at the end of the day, we all need to recognize that it's not just dropping somebody off at somebody's house down the street like it used to be when we were growing up. This is a whole different ballgame for our children. And it costs a lot of money to educate them. And we talk about meals at the very beginning of this conversation for breakfast and lunch. Our preschools provide breakfast and lunch, and some of those provide dinner. So the cost of that is immense. And I could tell you that I know preschool providers that have been in the industry for 30 or 40 years that can't afford health insurance. But yet they're crafting the minds of our children because they have a passion for it. We require them to be degreed, but we do not respect that industry. So there's a balance on this. We need to have everybody chip into this conversation. We need to have businesses step up to the plate. We need to have municipalities step up to the plate. You fill in the blank. Everybody needs to be a part of this, because if we want our society to go back to work fully, we need to have safe, healthy, and appropriate places for our children to go to school. You can do that.
So I'll do the piggybacking, which I will say I'm proud that the piece of legislation Michelle referred to was a finance committee bill, and
Yes,
we
it
know how
was.
to pick good leadership for the initiatives we do. So this, I think this is a real challenge for people, not just in Connecticut, throughout the country, and I applaud the efforts on at President Biden for trying to address this as well. But it also presents an opportunity for us, because it is for a coalition of people supporting it. So workers need this, parents need this, businesses need this, towns need it. I mean, everybody, there's a whole lot of different interests who don't always, aren't always aligned, which need to who are invested in ensuring we have better quality, increased access, and better quality childcare available to our children. Because to Michelle's point, that is the moment in life. There is no more important era in the life of our kids in those early years. So we did set up a structure that will allow us to hopefully draw some private investment, because we do believe there is interest in that, and to have sort of a three-legged stool between, corporate investment, individuals, and the government helping to invest in that. We're just beginning. We've set up the structure, and now we'll be looking to figure out how to invest in that going forward.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else that would like to add to that?
Yeah, this amazing work on this front by you two, and I would agree said there. This is certainly an issue that we saw recently when they were talking about changing the dates that kids were going to be eligible to go into kindergarten, which would have created another 9,000 kids who needed childcare, and there just weren't places for them. So we need to also try to do what we can to make it easier for more spots to be open for kids in childcare.
So we have an affordability crisis in Connecticut. And childcare is a big part of it, and it's something that the state can really do something about. So I think it's very important that we fund this child care trust fund. I know that there is talk about maybe private investment into it, but I think it should be considered that the state put some money into that child care trust fund. I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and the realities of how expensive child care are very, very real to me. I have friends who are parents where one of the parents, they looked at their budget and said, like, look at how much we're paying on child care. One of us needs to leave the workforce. And it's having a tremendous drain on Connecticut's economy where, we really need people in the workplace. People who would want to be in the workplace, but they can't afford child care. Child care is just too expensive for them. So dealing with them it's important for addressing our affordability crisis, and it's also important for helping our businesses. I'm very excited to see that childcare is a priority for the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, and it's also a priority for many sort of progressive groups on the left. And to me, I think the best solutions come from broad and strong coalitions, and I think this is an area where we can bring together a broad and strong coalition to address our childcare issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to question 4, I believe, which was sent in by Sally Paris. What specific issues do you feel address the affordability issue in Connecticut, especially helping the elderly?
I think one of the really big issues around affordability is housing. And I know that housing is a significant issue for elderly people. I was out talking to voters at a condo complex or an apartment complex here in Torrington, and I met a couple of elderly people who told me that their apartment building was going to be turning into condos, and that they were very worried that they wouldn't be able to afford to buy their units, and there was really no place else for them to go. So I think it's super important that we find ways to build more housing, specifically for seniors, and having more housing for seniors allows people to downsize from the homes that they may currently be living in their community, and stay in their community, and when they move out of that home that they've been living in for a long time, then a younger family is able to kind of move into that. So housing is an issue that affects the full spectrum of people who live in this state, but I think it's particularly impactful to elderly people.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Just because we
So, as Paul says, we have a tremendous issue with housing in the state of Connecticut. So knock on doors, the number of seniors I encounter who are stuck in homes they can't afford to live in, but can't afford to move out of is shocking. They're in homes where in 3-4 bedroom homes where they raised their families decades ago, that their children long ago moved away, and they'd love to be able to downsize in the community that they've spent decades. But there's no place for them to downsize to. Vermont has a program where they provide funding to homeowners to create an affordable accessory apartment, which is allowed in the vast majority of towns in Connecticut. They're also called granny flats, which is what you probably refer to them as in this case. And they provide Vermont provides funding in exchange for a 5 to 10 year affordability commitment. That program has proven to be very popular and successful in Vermont, and I think it'd be great to establish a similar program here in Connecticut. So you can have a scenario where a senior moves out of the main house, maybe rents it out to a young couple, and moves into a nice, small, manageable granny flat. So dealing with the housing issue is important. We have issues with the property taxes, sort of ratcheting up on seniors, on fixed incomes. I hear about that a lot. But sort of providing places for seniors to downsize into it would go a long ways to helping address that issue.
Thank you.
So I'll pick up on some of the comments about housing is a big part of this, and we are seeing increasing numbers of seniors in the homeless population. That is going way up, and it's really concerning. So we need to address this at all levels. Of course, that also, that's not the only cost that's affecting our seniors. Another one that I hear a lot about, and we all know about, is the cost of prescription drugs. And those costs go up, and those who are living on a fixed income are hard pressed. And so we are fortunate that the federal government is starting to negotiate, some of those drug prices, and they're coming down in batches, which is really helpful to us. But I think the state can also step into that and try to be helpful and take a look at where we can help. We've done things, for example, with respect to the cost of insulin, but there are other prescription drugs that we can take a look at and try to reduce the cost for seniors. I'll add that another thing that I hear a lot about, it's not so directly translated into money, but it's loneliness. And I think our particularly, so I represent a very rural district, and there are a lot of seniors who get sort of trapped in their homes and don't have access to services and are increasingly isolated from their neighbors. And so we need to make sure that we're funding the systems that can provide not just alternative housing programs, but senior centers where people can get together and they can participate in programs, that are not just for seniors, for example, that are also for young people and seniors, so that there's more, mixing of the population. And we need to make sure we're looking at the whole picture.
So this is something that hurts my heart. And some of the most important phone calls and heartbreaking phone calls that have ever come to my office is somebody that's in their more mature years, and they say, I'm being evicted next month. I have nowhere to go. And in Torrington, you used to be able to find a one-bedroom apartment for $600-700, and now it's $1,500-1,600. And then when you talk about being able to live on a one floor versus the third floor, I don't want to walk up 3 flights of stairs, and I'm not there yet. And by the grace of God, one day I will be. But I think that we take advantage of a population that might not be able to fight for themselves or feel comfortable fighting for themselves. We've done a lot of work at the State House talking about all the things that we've talked about, elderly housing, and Maria just touched a little bit on the senior centers. Part of that piece is also about Meals on Wheels that we must continue to fund. That does 2 things. What that does is it gives somebody meals so they don't have to worry about where they can find the money for food. At the same time, it does a wellness check without people feel like they're being checked on. And during the pandemic specifically, when we were all so very isolated, what ended up happening was our Meals on Wheels people would go out. They might not be able to walk in the door, but they can meet somebody at their front door, see them through the window, and make sure that they're okay. And for all of us, we might have had somebody that we could talk to. But for some of them, they had nobody. And if you were lucky to have a Meals on Wheels delivery a couple of times a week, that was what you had. So when we talk about wraparound services, which we talk about a lot in state government, what that really means to us is that's wrapping around the entire person. And how do we take care of that entire person at one time? And I'm a firm believer that you cannot put a price on somebody's life or protecting somebody in the manner that they feel they have no other options. And we look at the things that we're suffering with. We've done significant things with prescription drugs, and I've been able to do a non-medical switch formulary so people don't spiral when they have their medications changed, and they don't feel like somebody else owns them, but their actual doctor owns their health care, not an insurance company or somebody else. But we should not be afraid to fight and defend ourselves, and we should not be afraid to talk, and I find that the older that we get, sometimes the more afraid that we get to do that. And the other thing that we also need to do is hold our nursing homes accountable. Because in a lot of cases, folks need to do that. They can't afford to do that, or they're afraid to do that. And we must do better at that. That has been an ongoing goal of mine and something that I've been working on for many, many years, myself and some colleagues, and we've done significant work in that regard. But we should take care of folks that have walked this earth before we walk this earth. And again, like I said, by the grace of God, we'll all be able to be there one day too. But we need to treat people with respect and not take advantage of them. And when we have landlords that are jacking the rates 2, 3, 4 times what somebody's able to pay, and they don't care whether that person's going to live in a car, live in a street, maybe they don't have a meal, we need to figure out a way to find our humanity in what we're doing these days.
Okay, thank you very much for those answers. Michelle, I know you didn't see my questions here, but you talked about jacking prices, and that's going to be a later question on here. Moving on to question number 5. Sent in by Nicole Macalos, I believe. Do you feel there can be anything done to prevent lies in campaigning, whether it be in advertising or verbally in speeches?
I'll take a crack at that, being a lawyer and a federal prosecutor, and this is a bedrock source of frustration. We have had a lot of conversations recently about how a lie can travel the world much more quickly than the truth. And so particularly when you do actual policy, it's complicated. It's not a soundbite. If you want to solve actual problems, you got to dig in, you got to listen to both sides, and the stuff you craft, we've talked about, durable, broad-based policy that has a lot of, people invested in it, that makes it complex. But the soundbite travels super fast. It is very hard to call it out. I do think there have been some interesting sound bites recently with people complaining about being fact-checked and how that's just not fair. I believe in being fact-checked. Listen, we all make mistakes. I make a mistake. I welcome somebody challenging me and saying, I think you got that wrong. That's part of the process. That should not be we don't have a license to give out information that we just make up because it's in our interest. So very hard to do much about it legally, but I think the important positive thing is that we can all stand up and be proud of who we are. We all get up in the morning and look at ourselves in the mirror and say, am I the kind of person that spreads misinformation and fear and anger, or am I somebody who's actually trying to listen to people and help them solve their problems, regardless of where they come from in the political spectrum? And I am proud to be the latter, and I think we can all be an example every day and stand up for those values, and hopefully, have that be. I think that's one of the best ways to combat those lies.
I agree completely. And I think that it talks about your own human self and the character of who you are. And when I took office a few years ago, I had 4 children at home, 2 in grade school, and 1 in high school and 1 in college. And being a mom, one of the most important qualities is so your children can know that they can count on you. And I always used to joke about the fact that I would go to work and I would want to be the person that they would be like, that's my mom. Not, oh my gosh, that's my mom. And you do get both, and by default, right? And so when I think about this conversation specifically, and over the years, the rhetoric has just gotten so significantly worse. And I think a lot of that has to do with the world of which we live in, social media, and the world is is fed instantaneous information, and before it's even able to be corrected, it either becomes the truth or the fiction. And at the end of the day, I think that we all have a significant amount of responsibility to ensure that we do our homework. And with all of us that are sitting here on this table, there's a little bit of a difference between the two of us over here and the two of us over here. Not because that we're women and they're men, but because we have a voting record and they're trying to get a voting record. Anything that we do is public knowledge. And if we would all just take 5 minutes to look at something that we wonder is accurate. Is that true? Is it not true? What part of that is true? Every ounce of legislation that happens with every legislator is public record. Every vote we take, every bill that is done, everything that we've introduced, even our calendar is public information. So for somebody to spin the truth or give a piece of the truth to benefit what they want the outcome to be, I think is very irresponsible, especially in the day and age that we live in right now. And the one thing that I think that we forget is our children are watching. We are leading by example, and in some cases, this example is not an example that we should be proud of. So for folks that are here and folks that are watching, and anybody that we encounter, either on a campaign trail or in our daily life, like Maria said, I encourage you to push back on something that I've done. Let me give you the reason why I've made that decision. Because the decision for my district will be vastly different than the decision for Representative Warren's district, which will be vastly different for the two gentlemen to my right. So we have an obligation. And if we're going to go to the ballot and we're going to cast a vote, we better know who we're casting that for and what that vote means. Because on November 6th, you can't go back and change it. That's how we combat the truth.
Next.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to do anything legally about lies and misinformation that gets spread. And I know I personally find it infuriating when I see something that's just blatantly not true and hear it. And I think a lot of it is incumbent on us to have a little bit of skepticism when you hear something that just sounds just unbelievable, and to try to dig in and try to understand whether it's true or not. And I know, like, running this campaign, I'm trying to as best I can be truthful in the things that I say. I think it's incumbent on everyone who is running for office to want to be able to look in the mirror at night and say, like, the stuff that I've said is accurate.
So 2016, we had entered a new era with alternative facts. There once was a time when politicians would sort of stretch the truth, and they'd get called out on it. But we didn't have people brazenly lying again and again and again, and people started to believe those lies just through the repetition. And we had we have a vice presidential candidate who is repeating these things about people, an immigrant, targeted immigrant community, saying that they're eating people's cats and dogs and other pets, and that brought great harm onto that community. And when he was called out for it, he said, "I will make up stories if I need to in order to get attention." As someone who thinks, grew up, hearing character counts, and you need to tell the truth, and running for the highest office, or it's a great honor, and it comes with great responsibility. It is very disheartening for me to see that all happen. We haven't seen anything so brazen at the state and local level to that extent, fortunately, but I'm very concerned about the direction where we're headed. And as everyone here says, you need to look in the mirror and be able to say, I can stand up for what I said, and I think it's helpful that in Connecticut we require the approved by the candidate language, which sort of puts the onus on the candidate to look at this and say to themselves, can I defend that? But at the same time, campaigns, elections are very much about a choice between A and B, and sort of coming up with a contrast there. So yeah, it's a vexing problem, and we are in a challenging era now, and I hope we get past this era and return to a time when people felt like they had to speak the truth and not make bold-faced, irresponsible and reckless lies.
Thank you very much. I'd like to add that TikTok is not a fact checker, so please do not turn to TikTok to check any facts. And closing on that remark, Michael Jackson eloquently said, "I'm looking at the man in the mirror," so very nice. Moving on to question number 6, sent in by John Buckley. What would be your number one legislative priority in the next House session? Who would like to take that one first?
So my top priority in general is addressing Connecticut's affordability crisis. There are so many people that are suffering here in Connecticut. I hear about the cost of living all the time. Housing is a very big portion of it. I have some ideas for how we can address our housing crisis while respecting local control of zoning and open space. But childcare is a big part of it, and utilities are a huge part of it as well. We are dealing with this current spike in utility rates, but back in early 2023, there was another spike in utility rates. I volunteer at the food bank in Kent, and when that spike occurred in 2023, we had people coming into the food bank we had never seen before because of that spike in utility rates. And as a food bank volunteer, I just thought to myself that this absolutely should not be something that's happening. We can't tell people that electricity is going to be free or very cheap, but we should be able to provide people with stability. We should be able to stabilize those rates. But here we are, almost 2 years later, with another spike in utility rates, and the Republicans are making a huge issue out of it. I would say rightly so. But that is something that we absolutely have to deal with. So again, my priorities are to address affordability, Connecticut's affordability crisis, and the various facets of it.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way, that affordability is the biggest issue that I'm hearing over and over from people when I'm talking to them at the doors. One of the reasons that I want to be a state senator is that I have a finance background, and I think that could be very useful in Hartford, and I'd love to use my experience working on these issues of affordability, whether it's healthcare, housing, electricity, childcare. I think my finance background could be very beneficial there. I spent 22 years working in fixed income finance, which is working with interest rates and bonds. And I'm a graduate of the Wharton School of Business, and I think that that experience there applies to working on all these kind of complex problems. I know that electricity is a particularly vexing problem, as Justin just mentioned, and I understand that it's difficult for the leadership in the General Assembly to find people who even want to volunteer to be on the Energy and Technology Committee. I know Maria has served on it in the past, because it's such a vexing problem, and Connecticut has had some of the highest electricity rates in the country for decades, and if you're sitting on the committee, you're going to get blamed for that. But I'll, raise my hand and say, I would like to go to Hartford to try to, solve this complex problem and make things better for people.
Just so you know, we're going to call the Senate president really quick. Let him know that you volunteered. Oh, we got two. I think the one uniqueness about the State House is the amount of topics that we're responsible to cover. And we often say that we aren't masters in all, but we know a lot of, you know a little bit about a lot, but you can't know everything about everything. And so you talk about folks that have expertise in business and finance, and then there's others of us that come in with an expertise in other things. And so that's what makes the beauty of the build-up. So when you ask me what my priorities are, it's so complicated to give you just one. Because I feel so guilty that if I say, okay, I only want to work on nursing homes, then I'm leaving a whole bunch of other things out. I only want to work on education, I'm leaving a whole bunch of other things out. So for me, it's really about solving the problems of the day and improving on the things that we've been able to work on since I've been there and the continued growth of that. I never thought I would talk about energy and electric as much as I have in the last 6 months in my entire life. And I'm happy to do it because it's educated me more than I've ever known. The same way that I'm sure that some of my counterparts feel about early childhood education when I'm talking about them till I'm blue in the face each and every day to say this affects you as well. I don't ever go into a legislative session with one major priority. I go in with all the things that I've been working on to be able to figure out how to build on them and make them better. And then I leave myself open to what somebody else might need at the time. And we will come back in January and we will definitely be talking about electric rates and energy and PURA and the board. We're going to be talking about all of that. But we're also going to be talking about early childhood education, school meals, nursing homes, health care, and the list goes on and on and on. Not to mention the things that our municipalities are going to need from us as well. So when I sit and say what my number one priority is, it's about representing the people that put me there.
Tough to compete with that answer. So you'll notice that a lot of us are, I really applaud, I think they're a group of problem solvers sitting up here, and I think that's a proud thing for me to be sitting with that group. We're all a little bit avoiding the question, and I will explain why I'm about to kind of avoid the question, which is, so because, again, I work on the budget, I have a built-in now kind of reluctance to go in and say, this is my most important issue, because every issue, we have to balance our budget every year. Every issue, you fight for one issue, there's a trade-off. You're going to do this, that means you can't do that. So what are you not going to do if you do this? And I believe that is how we get to better places, if we make sure we're taking all those things into consideration. That said, my priorities, I think, can be sort of discerned by the committees that I've chosen to sit on. So I have been on the Environment Committee since I've been in the legislature, because I believe the district I represent, in particular, the environment underpins our economy. We have a lot of businesses that rely on having a clean environment. It brings people to the area, tourism, businesses, you name it. Healthcare, people, particularly in the pandemic, we learned that access to, green space and getting outside kept us from going over the edge. It's about education. It's about cost, future costs, because we are now looking at, every town in my district has paid the costs from violent weather, which caused by climate change. So those costs by climate change are already being borne by the towns that I represent. And so all of that is wrapped into why I sit on the Environment Committee. I sit on the Energy and Technology Committee. I actually joined the Energy and Technology Committee because of broadband. So for the district that I represent, the absence of broadband infrastructure is a big, fat, blinking red light. Whenever you map Connecticut in terms of who has access, we are the part that sticks out. So we have a lot to do there. And then I, found myself learning a lot about the complexities of energy policy, as others have pointed out, particularly this year. And again, I think that just points up the fact energy policy is complicated, and people who are pretending that it is simple and slamming their fist on the table and saying if we go into session tomorrow, we can fix it.
getting at.
Who said to be skeptical about that? I don't know which one of you said that. It pays to be a little bit skeptical. And I found that when I treat my constituents like the smart people that they are, like the grown-ups that they are, and when you take the time to explain it to them, they appreciate that, and they understand it, and they get, they value the fact that somebody's thinking through these problems instead of pretending that they're some simple thing. I am a lawyer. I have sat on the Judiciary Committee at various points in my life. I don't now because of the Finance Committee. It takes up too much of my time. But I am deeply interested in criminal justice reform and about, making our system fair, transparent, accountable on both sides of the spectrum. I think that's something we should have in mind all the time. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to question 7. What do you feel is the correct amount of time for paid family leave in Connecticut?
Excellent question. A challenging one. I would say that it varies from family to family and the circumstances. I'd have to do some thinking about that one. Thank you.
Next.
I kind of don't actually understand what the question is actually getting at, like how long you should be able to have paid family leave? Is that the...
I believe so, the correct amount of time for paid family leave.
Yeah, I would have to think about that. I don't have a great answer to that.
I think it depends on the circumstance. And I believe that when we talk about new mothers and fathers that are trying to bond with their children, forcing somebody to go back to work in 5 days is not acceptable. Because at the end of the day, it's very critical for those early weeks and those early months to develop that bond. But I also understand that we have to find that appropriate blend between the business needs and our employees' needs. And so we've done some family medical leave here and family leave here in the state of Connecticut, and I believe that that has to be readdressed because there are circumstances that have gone awry and it hasn't worked right and people have taken advantage of it. And then I think that there's other situations where we can maybe do something a little bit more. And also listening to the business community better as well. I don't want my employees to not be able to stay home with a sick child or to care for an elderly parent because I need them to be at work, but I also need to ensure that I can fill that position that they have. We should never be in the position where we have to choose that. And I look at so many other countries who do it so much better than we do. And so if there is an appropriate time, I think that's circumstantial depending on that situation. But at the end of the day, we have to have an honest conversation and not a party conversation. It has to be an honest conversation about what the constituents need, the employers need, and what's going to benefit everybody in the middle.
Well, it's not zero,
That's true.
and that's what it used to be. So I worked for the federal government when 2 of my kids were born, and I had no paid family medical leave, none. United States, I think, as Michelle said, is an outlier in terms of any group of economies that are similar to ours value this. And so I'm very glad that we have made steps to adapt that. Now, note that many people, when we passed that law, that was very hard to pass. And a lot of people said, it's going to bankrupt us, the system's not going to last, we can't afford it, everybody's going to go to the bank on this. It didn't happen. In fact, the system is so flush and working so well that I had proposals in the Finance Committee to take the money out of that system and put it somewhere else. So it was hard, and I'm very proud that Connecticut took a step to create the program. To the other's point, it always is something that we need to go back and look at. I think in addition to listening to business needs, which we should always do, we have to also take a look at the competitive labor market. We have a very tight labor market here, and we want to be able to attract and keep young workers raising families in Connecticut instead, to address our otherwise aging population. So I think this is a really important part of that conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. Question number 8. What is your position on changing term limits? Anonymously sent in.
Yeah, I would support having some sort of term limits for, folks in the General Assembly. I know there are, like, some people who've been in the General Assembly for like 40 years, and literally. And, yeah, maybe something along the lines of, I don't know, 5 or 6 terms, something like that, and then move on. But, I think, getting, new people with new ideas into the legislature periodically, I think would be very beneficial to the government here.
Yeah, it's easy for the challengers to sit here and talk about term limits, right? So I used to be adamantly, stridently pro term limits, but I sort of now sort of see the benefits. I could see the arguments for not having term limits, in terms of you have people in there with sort of the expertise and the background that they develop over the years on the committees that they sit on. Michelle's been there for a while and developed clearly a great range of deep expertise, which I think benefits Torrington, benefits her district, and it benefits the legislature. And there's also, we have to recognize that for the Connecticut General Assembly, there is a recruitment problem in terms of finding people that want to spend 3 or 6 months running for this job that pays $40,000 and is a part-time job that you're supposed to make it work with whatever else you do. So I would be very open to have that discussion, but I could see pros and cons on both sides there.
So I struggle with this conversation. And the reason why is I think that by voting, that has a sense of term limit conversation to it. That holds us accountable. If I have, to Justin's point, what's supposed to be a part-time job that is absolutely, so don't let people think otherwise, it is absolutely not a part-time job. And if you're doing it right, you hold this as a full-time job. But I'm accountable each and every day, every 2 years, to the voters of my district. If I am not performing for my district, if I'm not bringing things back home to my community, if my town doesn't see financial reimbursements on projects like the high school or the food bank or, we'll talk about the Warner Theater, that's making me responsible to my community. And that's holding me accountable. So hopefully when folks go to the voting booth in a few weeks, they say, hey, you know what, Michelle's done a really good job representing that. She's helped doing tax cuts. She's done this, she's done this, she's done this. We can count on that, and we can count on her. The other issue that I think that people forget when they talk about term limits is this is a 2-year term. And that comes with significant hurdles on the front end and the back end of that. Because for folks that have never aspired to be in political office, and that was me, you have a huge learning curve of going in to realize what you're dealing with, how you're dealing with it, and what you need to do. So by the time you learn what you need to learn, then your first legislative session is already over. So that's in 6 months. Then you have a few months in between, and then you go back your short session, and then you're campaigning all over again. So where do you get the ability to dig in to make effective policy if you're in for a 1.5 years and then you're out again? And where's the continuity of accountability for the voters to rely on the fact that you, as their elected official, is in and out, in and out, in and out? And why should we have to be responsible for worrying about re-election as opposed to being more concerned about the fact that we're making good, effective policy decisions to improve the quality of life in our communities? So when we talk about term limits, it's such a key phrase of people want to use it, but we have to recognize what comes along with that. So I've actually put in legislation in years past that we extend our terms in the state of Connecticut from 2 years to 4 years. It would cause a constitutional amendment, and that would be some issues. But anyway, that's also $1 million savings because we're not having campaigns every 2 years. Then if you want to do that and you want to talk about extending your term limit to 2 years to 4 years, then I think maybe you have a conversation about term limits. But if we continue on this 2-year path, we have to ensure that people can stay there a little bit longer to ensure that good, effective policy is done, as opposed to voting somebody in because, hey, I don't like them, or they don't look right, their hair is the wrong color, or maybe it's because they have the wrong letter behind their name, as opposed to the good, effective policy work that they're actually doing.
So let Michelle have the last word. So I also, when I look at my colleagues in the House, I sit in the Connecticut House. First of all, note that we are not the U.S. Senate. It is not filled with octogenarians. So our problem is not their problem. And they do have a problem. I would support, I would consider age limits, for example. I think that might be an appropriate thing. But I have had this happen to me numerous times, particularly early in my terms, when I have thought I had this great new idea, and I've brought it up in committee and had this conversation, and one of our colleagues, who's one of the longest-serving colleagues, has quietly come over to me, Maria, did you look at this part of the code? Because there's a part of it that deals exactly with that. And if you did, we benefit from that expertise, the people who've been around for a long time. So, and because it's not, a third of the legislature, I think the balance is working out pretty well. But I'd consider age limits. I think we've learned a thing or two about that.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have just about 2 more minutes, and I think I want to just ask one more question that I do have up here. Question 9 and question 10, I think, can be combined. And Michelle, like I said, you touched on affordable housing in Connecticut for seniors, and also question 10 also asks, what do you plan to do about rent prices that are rising too high to be affordable? So would anyone like to address that?
So we have a real housing crisis in Connecticut, of course, and there are many things we could do, but at the end of the day, what we absolutely have to do is increase the supply of housing in Connecticut. It is a fundamental supply and demand problem that we have to deal with. I do think that we should look at some protections for renters in terms of the rate of increase that sometimes are allowed. I serve as the president of Kent Affordable Housing, and it's not listed in our mission statement, but providing stability, housing stability, is a core part of our mission. And it is extremely harmful to communities when you have a situation where an apartment building gets bought, then suddenly the rents are jacked up dramatically. It's a complicated issue, a very complicated issue, but dealing with the housing situation and making it so it is affordable for the people who work in our communities, to live in our communities, and for seniors to downsize, and for young adults to find a place of their own, that is a top priority for me. And I look forward to moving things forward in the state Senate if I am fortunate enough to be elected.
So I completely agree with Justin that we have a humongous housing problem here, and the main thrust of the problem is that it's a lack of supply, and that we need to build more housing. And there's like a housing continuum. We have people who are unhoused, people in temporary housing, people in permanent housing. We want to make sure that we're moving people in the right direction along that continuum. So if you're homeless, we want to make sure that we can get you into a shelter. So there need to be enough shelter beds. If you're in a shelter, we want to get you into temporary housing. So there has to be enough temporary housing. If you're in temporary housing, we want to get you into permanent housing. If you're in permanent housing that costs too much, we want to find ways to make sure that you're spending less than 30% of your income on that housing. And again, the way forward is to build more housing. I think the state can do things to incentivize municipalities to change their rules in such a way that's acceptable to municipalities, but makes the process of building more housing easier. And there are also agencies like the the Municipal Redevelopment Authority, which was recently formed and that provides expertise to municipalities that are eager to build new housing, and especially around transit. And it also has like a whole bunch of bonding to provide grants to get that housing built, and we need to make sure that agencies like the MRDA are funded and are able to do their job.
I think the beauty of this is that everybody has an idea and we kind of piggyback on each other. And the one thing that really saddens me, and we saw that come to light in such an elevated manner, was during the pandemic, folks from outside of our state sucked up our housing market, jacked our rates, and folks that really want to stay here cannot afford to stay here. So within the letter of the law, trying to figure out a way where we can balance out how many properties somebody from outside of our state that has no intentions on moving into our state can have, or the types of grants that we can offer to people and prioritize those folks that live in our state and in our communities, as opposed to allowing those grants to go to folks that are from outside of our state, is really something that I would like to see happen. Because the amount of young population folks that I have spoken to who have looked to buy houses that are being priced out of the market is not acceptable. And when I have, young adults, 25, 30 years old, and their goal is to own a piece of property because maybe they've lived in an apartment their entire life, or maybe they've not had a place to live their entire life. And you can't buy a house for under $350,000. I couldn't afford that on what I make. So how are we expected for them to be able to afford that on what they're making? So when we talk about the layered effect, it's really about holding, to the point made, our municipalities accountable on what they offer. Hold ourselves accountable to who's able to access the loans and the grants that we afford to folks. And at the end of the day, see if there's a way that we can incentivize for grants and loans for certain populations. And at the end of the day, as I said earlier, nobody in their more mature years should be feared to be homeless because they can't afford their rent. And nobody should have to make the decision between rent or housing, health care, and food. So as we talk about housing and wraparound services, we have to get out of our own way, and we all have to work together because there needs to be a solution to this problem yesterday. And we've been making incremental steps to improving it, but it is nowhere near where we need to be.
So I go back to the first part of the question was about rent increases specifically, and I would, as others I think have said, I would be willing to look seriously at landlords who are egregiously raising rents in inappropriate ways and bouncing people out. I don't think that's the whole problem, but it is a problem. Then the rest of this really, as others have said, is about supply. And we have a role in that because we need all kinds of housing built across the spectrum. And we've created in the legislature a lot of requirements that make that put up hurdles, increase expenses, make it hard to build. So I think we can look at that. We've done some things. For example, we passed a piece of legislation last year that we had something requiring something like 3 stairwells in particular kinds of construction. And there was no safety correlate. We looked very hard at this. You don't need 3 stairwells. And I'm not sure that was the number, but we reduced the number that was required in absolutely looking at the safety record, make sure we were keeping people safe, but we did not need that in order to build housing. Another part, I think, as Michelle, I think was part of what Michelle was talking about, is in terms of supply, there's housing in my community, sort of starter level homes, for example, that have been removed from the market by people who are buying them up and using them for short-term rentals. We have almost no data on how much of that is occurring in our state, and so I will be working this year on it and starting to at least quantify that and give municipalities the ability to track how much is happening in their community so that we can figure out whether there's an appropriate way that we ought to empower municipalities to deal with that, for example, because that is also reducing supply. So I think there's lots of things that we can do to make sure that we, and also sort of, again, we put, as others have mentioned, we did put significant amount of money into housing in the bond bill that we passed this last year, but it's not moving. So we also need, and this is true not just of housing grants, it's other programs, to take a look at what bureaucracy exists in there that's keeping that money from moving to its intended target. So that for sure we'll be looking at this year.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Also thank all of our representatives up here. And we look forward to November 5th elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'd also like to let you know that this will be airing next week on Altice Cable Access Channel 5. So we want to encourage you to check it out. We want to thank for everyone that viewed in on the live stream. And if you want to get this on our YouTube, on our website page, please let us know at CT-Views, and we'll get a copy out to you, okay? Thank you once again. Thank you to 5 Points. Bill, as always, thank you for everything that you do here as facilities manager, and we appreciate each and every one of you. See you November 5th. Thank you.